Rain whispered against the hospital windows, a soft rhythm that didn't quite reach the silence inside. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing the white walls in a tired glow. Doctor. Laura Bennett rubbed her temples, her scrub still creased from 14 hours of surgery. Then an intercom call. Dr. Bennett, ER VIP patient. She almost ignored it, but fate rarely asks politely. Down in the emergency room, a man in a charcoal suit stood arguing with the nurse. His tie loosened, his patience gone. I don't need a doctor. I've got meetings. His voice was sharp, commanding, the kind used to getting its way. Have you ever met someone who walked into your world and cracked open everything you thought you knew about control? Laura stepped forward, glasses fogged slightly from the cold air. One look at him, and she recognized the type power dressed in silk and certainty. Ethan Cole, CEO, untouchable, except for the pulse racing too fast beneath his cuff. The scent of antiseptic mixed with rain as their gazes locked hers, calm and steady, his defiant and afraid to admit it. Put the phone down, she said quietly. In here, you're just a patient. Outside, thunder rolled over Denver. Inside, two storms began, one of medicine, and one of the heart. He thought it was just another routine checkup. He couldn't have been more wrong. The night at Denver General was half asleep, fluorescent lights flickering, monitors beeping in uneven rhythm. The rain outside had softened into mist, pressing against the long hallway windows. Doctor. Laura Bennett walked through that corridor like a ghost in scrubs. 14 hours, 3 surgeries, 2 cups of coffee that had gone cold before she'd finished half. Her hair, once carefully pinned that morning, had surrendered into a messy bun. The elastic tugged against her scalp. Beneath the mask, her jaw ached from tension. She hadn't noticed building since noon. She was halfway through dictating a surgery note when the pager buzzed against her hip. Dr. Bennett to ER. Immediate consult. VIP patient. She closed her eyes briefly. VIP. That usually meant wealthy, impatient, and convinced mortality could be negotiated with a checkbook. Downstairs. The emergency department hummed with the chaos of the city night, the hum of stretchers, the scent of antiseptic mixed with rain-soaked coats. At Bay 3, she found the VIP. A man stood beside a gurney, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. His phone glowed in his hand like a weapon. The nurse, visibly exasperated, tried to coax him to sit. I told you, I'm fine, he was saying, his voice clipped but calm, the kind that had power trained into it. I have meetings in an hour. This is ridiculous. Laura stopped at the doorway, watching. He didn't notice her at first. Most people didn't not when they were used to being the loudest voice in the room. Mr. Cole, the nurse began, your blood pressure temporary. I was running to the car in the rain. He gave a faint smirk. Stress test passed. I think. Laura stepped closer. Stress test failed, she said quietly. He turned, startled by the firmness in that calm voice. She was small, or at least smaller than he expected. Her frame leaned from long shifts and skipped meals. Oversized glasses fogged slightly from the temperature change. A surgical mask covered most of her face, but the eyes above it were steady, unreadable, yet oddly grounding. Who are you, Dr. Bennett? You're in my ER. He hesitated. Then I'll be brief. I don't need to be here. Most people who end up here think the same thing, she said, checking the monitor by his bed, blood pressure 160/95, irregular pulse. You don't get that from jogging to your car. Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole Enterprises. She recognized the name from half the city's donation plaques, straightened slightly, as if posture could prove health. It's just adrenaline. I had a long day. So did I, Laura replied evenly. But I'm not about to drop dead over it. That earned the first flicker of surprise. People didn't usually talk to him that way. She clicked her pen, began her exam. The air between them tightened, his impatience colliding with her composure. When she touched his wrist to count the pulse, he almost flinched, not from pain, but from the intimacy of someone taking charge. "You're tense," she noted. He exhaled. "You would be too if a nurse kidnapped you from your office." "You fainted in your office?" "Mr. Cole," she corrected. "That's not kidnapping. That's physics." His mouth opened, then shut again. Laura scribbled notes, ignoring the weight of his stare. He was used to being obeyed. She was used to saving people too stubborn to save themselves. "How long have you been ignoring chest discomfort?" she asked. He frowned. "A few days, maybe a week. It's not pain, just tightness and dizziness. Only when I stand up too fast." She met his eyes over the rim of her glasses. "And you thought caffeine would fix that?" He hesitated, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. "You sound like my assistant." "Then you should listen to her." He studied her for a moment, the calm certainty in her tone, the faint creases at the corners of her tired eyes. There was something unsettling about a woman who didn't flinch before power. "Look," he said finally, "I appreciate your concern, doctor, but I'm fine. Just need some water. Maybe a quick scan if it makes you feel better." Laura peeled off her gloves. "I'm not here to feel better, Mr. Cole. I'm here to keep you alive long enough to learn how." The words hung between them, quiet but sharp. For a second, neither spoke. The monitors beeped softly. The rain deepened against the window. Then his phone buzzed on the tray table. He reached for it instinctively. Laura's hand shot out, stopping him. "No phones in treatment?" His brow arched. "Excuse me. You're here because you pushed your heart past what it could bear. You don't get to keep pushing from this bed. I have responsibilities." "So do I," she said. "Mine involve making sure people like you stop pretending they're invincible." He stared at her, incredulous, this woman in rumpled scrubs daring to tell him no. The room seemed to shrink to the space between them, his pride, her patience. The nurse shifted awkwardly near the curtain, sensing the quiet standoff. "Mr. Cole," Laura said softly, "if you want to walk out, you can sign the release. But if you stay, you follow my rules. Starting with this." She nodded to the nurse. "Confiscate his phone." The nurse blinked, unsure if she was serious. Ethan looked from one to the other, disbelief flickering into something else, almost admiration, though he'd never admit it. "You can't just—" "I can," she said simply, "and I just did." He opened his mouth, but the look in her eyes silenced him. There was no arrogance there, no defiance, only authority earned from saving lives long past midnight. The nurse took the phone, apologetic. Laura turned back to the monitor, her voice calm again. "You're staying overnight for observation. I'll order labs and an EKG." Ethan leaned back against the pillow, jaw tight. For a man who commanded boardrooms, surrender was foreign, but the fatigue creeping through his chest made rebellion pointless. He watched her chart notes with quick, efficient strokes, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Her glasses slid down slightly, catching the reflection of the monitor's light. He wanted to say something, a joke, maybe, but the words tangled somewhere behind pride. When she finally looked up, he expected coldness. Instead, there was something else, quiet concern, quickly hidden. "Try to rest," she said. "The world can wait." As she walked out, he exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. The faint scent of rain still clung to her coat. For the first time that night, Ethan Cole didn't reach for control. He just watched the door close behind her, wondering why a stranger's calm voice could make the walls around him feel so fragile. Somewhere down the hall, her footsteps faded, and for reasons he couldn't explain, He already knew this wouldn't be the last time she'd walk into his life and take something from his hands. The morning light slipped through the blinds, landing in pale stripes across the white sheets and the quiet hum of machines. Ethan Cole lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the beeps. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain, a reminder that he wasn't in charge here. For a man used to dictating his own hours, the stillness felt like punishment. The door opened with a soft click. Laura Bennett stepped in. Clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable. Her hair was tied back again, a few stray strands framing her face. The glasses were back too large, practical, slightly fogged from her mask. She didn't look at him right away. She checked the monitor, the IV line, then the chart. Every movement was efficient, controlled, deliberate. "You're awake," she said. "Barely," he replied, his voice hoarse from sleep. "I didn't know hospitals believed in comfort." She glanced up. "Just once. We believe in survival. Comfort's optional." Ethan gave a short laugh, more from disbelief than humor. "You always this charming in the morning. Only when my patients try to be." He studied her for a moment, the way her tone carried no malice, just truth. Something about her composure unsettled him. He was used to people tiptoeing around him, feeding his confidence, matching his rhythm. She didn't. She moved at her own pace, as if his world didn't exist here. He leaned back against the pillow, attempting nonchalance. "You know, Dr. Bennett. Most people find me a little more impressive once I've had coffee." Her pen didn't pause. "I've met impressive people. Mr. Cole, they usually don't have to tell me." The jab was quiet but clean, slicing through his charm like a scalpel. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't like me very much, do you?" "I don't know you," she said. "I only know your EKG." "And what does that tell you?" "That you've been living on caffeine, adrenaline, and denial." She set the clipboard down. "Your heart's paying the price." He chuckled. "A dry sound. That's one opinion. It's also data." He turned his head toward her. "You always this blunt. Only when I want to be heard." Their eyes met. For a moment, the air between them tightened again, like the space before a storm. He was trying to steer the conversation. She was quietly refusing to let him. Ethan folded his arms, feigning ease. "You think you've got me figured out already?" Laura exhaled slowly. "I think you're scared," she said, not unkindly. His smile faltered. "Excuse me." "Of losing control." Her tone remained level, almost gentle. "Men like you mistake exhaustion for strength until their body disagrees." He laughed again, louder this time, though the sound cracked halfway through. "You think you know men like me." Her gaze flickered, just briefly, to the small scar on his wrist where the IV sat. "I've treated dozens of you," she said. "Different faces, same fight." For a second, Ethan didn't reply. The truth in her words stung because it fit. He looked away, jaw tightening. Laura picked up her chart again, not pressing further, but her heartbeat quickened a small echo of memories she hadn't invited. Her ex-husband's face flashed in her mind. Daniel, still in his office at midnight, the glow of spreadsheets reflecting off his glasses, the empty side of the bed waiting. "You can't fix what doesn't see itself," she had told him once. He hadn't listened. She blinked the thought away. Not here, not now. When she looked back, Ethan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read: curiosity, maybe, or something close to it. "You look like someone who's seen too many people crash and burn," he said softly. "Occupational hazard. Still, it must get to you. It does when they don't learn." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm the exception." She met his gaze squarely. "There's no exception to biology." He opened his mouth to respond but stopped, realizing she wasn't going to be charmed. Not by humor, not by deflection. The silence stretched. The monitor beeped steadily, filling the space his confidence used to occupy. He tried again. quieter this time. I just don't like feeling, he hesitated, the word catching helpless. Laura's tone softened. That's not weakness, Mr. Cole. That's awareness. He didn't know how to respond to that. Awareness was something he avoided. Awareness meant slowing down. And slowing down meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering his father's face the night before the heart attack. The promise Ethan made over that hospital bed, I'll build something better. He'd kept that promise so tightly it had become a chain. Laura turned to adjust the monitor, giving him a moment to breathe. Her presence was steady, unshaken. He wondered if she'd ever been afraid of anything, or if she'd simply learned to bury it better than most. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost tired. You should let your body rest. The numbers don't lie. Ethan's lips curved slightly. Numbers are what I live by. Then you should respect them, she said, meeting his eyes. Because right now, they're saying slow down. Something in her tone calm, factual, yet edged with care hit deeper than he expected. He wanted to argue, to reassert control, but all he could do was watch her jot notes with neat precision. You really don't like being told what to do you? She said. Comes with the job description. Then consider this a demotion, she said softly. Your body's the boss now. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. You're not very good at flattery. That's not part of my treatment plan. The faintest smile touched her lips, quickly gone. Ethan saw it, though, and felt a strange shift in his chest that had nothing to do with blood pressure. She turned to leave, pausing by the doorway. The nurse will bring your breakfast soon. Low sodium, no caffeine. He groaned. That's not breakfast. That's punishment. You'll survive. I don't feel like it. She looked back once, eyes glinting just above the mask. You will if you stop trying to win every battle. He watched her go. The quiet confidence in her stride. The door clicked softly behind her. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the strange discomfort of being seen, not as a headline or a CEO, but as a man whose armor had begun to crack. He closed his eyes, exhaling. The monitor beeped steadily, keeping time with his uneven thoughts. Down the hall, Laura leaned briefly against the wall, letting the moment catch up with her. She hated the faint tremor in her hands. He reminded her too much of another man who thought control meant safety. But something about Ethan's eyes, sharp yet tired, defensive yet almost pleading, made her want to try again, to reach where she'd once given up. She straightened, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. There was no room for sentiment in medicine, only rhythm, precision, clarity. When she returned that evening, Ethan was sitting up, scrolling on a borrowed tablet. Still working, she said. Still breathing, he countered. Her gaze was steady, unamused. In this room, Mr. Cole. Money means nothing. Rhythm does. The words lingered long after she left, echoing in the sterile quiet. And for the first time, Ethan wondered if rhythm was something he'd forgotten how to hear. The rain had stopped, but the city outside the window still glistened under the gray morning light. In the quiet of his hospital room, Ethan Cole sat upright on the bed, sleeves rolled, watching the clock tick. The sterile air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something metallic. His phone was gone, confiscated, and the silence pressed harder because of it. He wasn't used to waiting for anything. The door opened. Laura Bennett stepped in with a folder tucked under one arm, a paper cup of coffee in the other. She didn't drink it yet. It was cooling in her hand. Her eyes met his briefly, professional but tired, before she set the folder on the small table near the bed. Morning, she said. Ethan offered a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. So, am I dying or just getting a lecture? Laura didn't smile back. She flipped open the folder, scanning the numbers. Your test results are in. Her tone was even deliberate. You have elevated cortisol levels. Your heart rhythm's irregular, and there's evidence of cardiac strain. He leaned back against the pillow, arms crossed. Sounds serious when you say it like that. It is serious. She looked up at him then, her gaze steady. "You're not dying today, Mr. Cole, but you're running toward it." The air stilled. For a moment, the only sound was the steady beep from the monitor by his bed. Ethan let out a low whistle. "You always deliver bad news like you're announcing the weather." "It's not bad news," she said softly. "It's a warning." He smirked. "You should try softer lighting, maybe background music. You'd make a great motivational speaker." Laura didn't respond. Her silence made the joke fall flat, echoing awkwardly in the room. He shifted, uncomfortable. "Look, I get it. Stress, no sleep, the usual villain. But I've built a company out of that formula." "Exactly," she said. "You've built everything but a margin for error." He frowned. "I handle pressure fine." She set the folder down, folding her arms. "Your body disagrees, and the body always wins, Mr. Cole." Ethan met her gaze, his jaw tightening. He didn't like being told he wasn't in control. He didn't like the word weakness. It had followed him since childhood, since the day his father collapsed on the floor of his office still clutching a briefcase. Ethan had been 16. He'd promised himself that day he would never let that kind of failure touch him. Now, hearing his heartbeat stutter through the monitor, he wasn't sure he'd kept that promise or just repeated it in another form. Laura studied him quietly. She'd seen this before, the way pride built armor over fear, how men like him hid behind control until the system that sustained them began to crack. In her mind, her ex-husband's face flickered again. Daniel, pacing the living room with his phone pressed to his ear, whispering about deadlines. About just one more deal? The way he'd looked at her when she'd asked him to slow down? You wouldn't understand. She did understand. She just couldn't save him. Laura straightened, shaking off the memory. "You need rest," she said. "Your body's exhausted, your nervous system's in overdrive, and your heart's signaling distress." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration simmering under his calm exterior. "You're telling me to quit my life, doctor? That's not exactly an option. I'm telling you to pause it before it pauses you." He looked away, out the window, where the wet streets reflected the gray sky. "You know, you say that like it's easy. It isn't." Her voice softened. "But dying isn't easier either." He laughed once, hollow. That's quite the bedside manner. Laura's lips curved slightly. "I've learned sugarcoating doesn't save hearts." He met her eyes again, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something unguarded. "You really think I can't handle this? I think you've handled too much, for too long." She let the words linger, watching him wrestle with them. The monitors kept time, steady but faintly irregular, like a drummer skipping beats in an old song. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "So, what's the plan? Pills, diet, meditation?" "All of the above," Laura said, flipping the page on her clipboard, "and rest. Real rest. Starting tonight." He scoffed. "You mean staying here?" "Yes. Not happening." Laura closed the folder with a quiet snap. "I wasn't asking for approval." He blinked. "Excuse me. You're being admitted overnight," she said, meeting his gaze evenly. "Observation, lab follow-ups, cardiac monitoring. It's non-negotiable. I have a company to run, and I have a patient to keep alive." Their eyes locked again, both unwilling to yield. His pride bristled. Her patience held firm. He tried to soften the tension with another smirk. "You enjoy bossing people around, don't you?" As she tilted her head. "Only the ones who think they can't be." A pause. Then, despite himself, Ethan laughed quietly, a genuine sound this time. "You really don't scare easily. Do you not anymore?" There was something about the way she said it, low, quiet, honest, that made him stop. He wanted to ask what had scared her once, but she was already writing notes, shutting the question down before it began. Minutes passed. The hum of machines filled the silence again, calm but unrelenting. Finally, She turned back to him, her tone softer now. "You don't have to agree with me," she said. "You just have to stay alive long enough to change your mind." He looked at her for a long moment. There was no pity in her voice, no judgment, just a kind of truth that felt heavier than the numbers in the report. He sighed, leaning back. "Fine. 1 night, 2, she corrected. He smiled faintly. "Now you're negotiating. Just doing my job." She checked the IV, adjusted the monitor, then glanced at the empty coffee cup she'd left by the table. The smell of it still lingered in the air, burnt, bitter, human. As she turned to leave, Ethan spoke quietly. "Dr. Bennett." She paused. "Do you ever get tired of telling people they are not invincible?" She looked back at him, her eyes soft behind the glass. "Every day," she said. "But it's the only truth that ever saves them." The door closed behind her. The sound of it echoed longer than he expected. Ethan stared at the ceiling again, the steady beeping of the monitor syncing with his heartbeat, a rhythm both foreign and familiar. For the first time in years, he didn't check his watch, didn't plan his next meeting, didn't think about profit or deadlines. He just listened. Somewhere between the hum of the machines and the faint whisper of rain outside, he wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe the real fight wasn't out there in the world he built. Maybe it was the one pulsing quietly in his chest. And as the room settled into silence again, the faintest thought crossed his mind. What if slowing down wasn't losing after all? The hospital never really slept. It only quieted the way a city does after midnight, when the world keeps moving, but slower, softer. The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint shuffle of shoes against tile, the whisper of machines breathing for someone else down the hall. Ethan Cole lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, wide awake. The clock on the wall glowed 2:17. He had no phone, no laptop, no calendar reminders pinging every 5 minutes, just silence. And the silence was unbearable. His fingers drummed against the blanket, restless, searching for a rhythm to control. There was none. For the first time in years, time wasn't bending to him, it was holding him still. He turned on his side, watching the pale line of light under the door. Nurses passed now and then, their voices low and distant. He could almost pretend this wasn't happening, that he was somewhere else, another version of himself, still in command. But the steady monitor beat beside him kept bringing him back, his own heart, measured and exposed, ticking like a metronome that refused to be silenced. When he closed his eyes, the darkness wasn't empty. It was full of noise, old memories, unfinished conversations, the echo of his father's voice. He saw him again, the way he had that day. A late afternoon in the office, the golden light cutting through the blinds. His father, Richard Cole, leaning over the desk, his tie loosened, laughing at something Ethan had said. Then the laughter stopped. A sharp sound, the coffee mug tipping, shattering, his father's hand gripping his chest. Ethan frozen for a second too long. The ambulance sirens came fast, but not fast enough. Ethan had been 16, standing outside the emergency room doors, watching strangers rush in and out while he held his mother's hand. He remembered the smell, antiseptic and fear, the same smell that filled this room now. He'd told himself, then, I'll fix it. I'll build something stronger. I'll make sure we never fall apart again. And he did. He built an empire out of deadlines and discipline, out of ambition that never slept. But tonight, lying under the same kind of sterile light, he couldn't tell if he'd kept a promise or just rewritten a tragedy. A soft knock broke the silence. The door creaked open, light spilling in from the hallway. Laura stepped inside. She moved quietly, like someone who'd done this 1,000 times, checking vitals in the dim light, adjusting IV lines, writing silent notes. She thought he was asleep. Ethan watched her from half-lidded eyes. The glow from the monitor touched her face, outlining the curve of her cheek, the strand of hair that had slipped loose from her bun. There was calm in her movements, not the forced kind, but the kind that came from knowing chaos and learning how to stand inside it. He realized then that she never rushed. Every gesture was deliberate, like she respected time instead of fighting it. For a moment, he wondered what her life looked like outside these walls. Did she have someone waiting for her? Did she go home to silence too? Laura noted his pulse, steady but uneven. The man asleep or pretending to be was a contradiction, all sharp edges and exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that came from running so far from yourself that you forgot what rest felt like. She thought of the file she'd read earlier. Ethan Cole, CEO, 41. No medical history except for occasional insomnia. The phrase had made her sigh. Insomnia was always the first confession, never the real one. Beneath it lived fear, guilt, grief, the things people didn't list on paper. She watched the green line on the monitor rise and fall. Men like him don't stop until something breaks, she thought. And when it does, they look surprised, as if the body had betrayed them instead of protected them for far too long. Her gaze drifted to his hand, resting near the edge of the blanket. A strong hand, but pale now, the veins visible under the thin skin. She'd seen hands like that before in surgeons, soldiers, builders, people who thought strength was a shield instead of a weight. She exhaled quietly, setting her pen down. The room was so still she could hear her own breath. Ethan kept his eyes closed, pretending to sleep, but he was aware of everything: the faint rustle of her sleeve, the tap of her shoes, the pause she took before turning off the light. He wondered if she ever allowed herself to stop. Laura glanced at him one last time, her expression softening just a fraction. He looked peaceful, and for a heartbeat, she let herself believe he was. She smiled barely, the kind of smile that comes when you see a glimpse of hope where you didn't expect it. It wasn't the smile of a doctor. It was something gentler, quieter. She turned to leave, but Ethan's eyes opened, catching it. Just for a second, he didn't move, didn't say a word, but that faint curve on her lips stayed with him long after she disappeared down the hallway. He lay there in the dark, staring at the door she'd just closed. His chest felt heavy. Not from pain this time, but from something unfamiliar. He wasn't sure what it was. Gratitude, maybe, or the terrifying realization that someone, somewhere in this building, saw him as more than his pulse, his title, or his mistakes. Outside, the rain started again, soft, rhythmic, patient, the kind of rain that didn't demand attention. He listened to it until his breathing slowed. For the first time in a long while, Ethan Cole didn't feel the need to run. He just let the night hold him. And for a moment, the silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like mercy. Morning arrived slowly, filtered through the pale curtains that softened the edges of the hospital room. The city outside was waking traffic murmuring, tires hissing on wet pavement. Inside, everything felt suspended between sleep and consciousness. Ethan Cole sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor tiles that gleamed too clean. He'd barely slept, not because of pain, but because silence had left too much space for thinking. The door creaked open, and Laura Bennett stepped in, holding a chart and a cup of black coffee. Her voice, calm but firm, filled the stillness. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." He looked up, forcing a faint smile. "Doctor? You're still here? I was starting to think you never leave this place. I could say the same about you." She set the chart at the foot of the bed and scanned his vitals. "How are you feeling?" "Trapped," he said, bored, slightly offended that breakfast came without caffeine. Laura didn't look up. "That's a good sign. Means you're alive enough to complain." He chuckled under his breath. "I try to excel at whatever I do. You've certainly excelled at overworking," she replied dryly. "And your test results agree." He raised an eyebrow. "So, the verdict." She looked up at him, her tone even but not unkind. "Chronic stress, borderline hypertension, elevated cortisol. Your body's been living in survival mode for years. He gave a low whistle. So, I'm basically a high-functioning disaster. Laura didn't smile. Your words, not mine. He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms, trying to make the conversation lighter. Don't worry, I'll schedule my heart attack between meetings next time. Keep it efficient. That's not funny. Her voice cut through his joke, soft, but sharp enough to leave a mark. Ethan's smirk faltered. You think this is about control? She continued. It's not. It's about neglect. You've treated your body like an employee you can overwork and underpay, expecting it to stay loyal forever. He looked away, the muscles in his jaw tightening. You talk like I did this on purpose. No one does, she said. It just happens when you forget to breathe. Something in her tone made him glance back at her. Forget to breathe. Laura met his eyes. When was the last time you took a breath without checking your email? He blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. He stopped. Tried again. I don't remember. She nodded, almost sadly. That's the problem. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It felt like standing at the edge of something true, something neither of them wanted to name yet. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, letting out a slow exhale. You know, everyone talks about balance, work life, health, happiness. It's a myth. There's no balance when everything depends on you. Laura tilted her head slightly. Depends on you. Or you make it depend on you. He looked at her, ready to argue, but the words never came. She had that effect dismantling his defenses with calm logic instead of confrontation. He sighed. You wouldn't understand. Try me. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The monitor kept its quiet rhythm beside them. Then he said softly, My father built something big, a company, a name. He died before he could enjoy any of it. I thought, if I worked harder, if I did it better, maybe I'd beat the odds. Maybe success could buy time. Laura's voice was quiet, and did it. He let out a bitter laugh. Apparently not. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she sat on the stool beside his bed, folding her hands on her lap. You know what I see every day, Mr. Coal people who thought they could trade their lives for something lasting. And when their bodies give out, they ask the same question. He looked at her, waiting. Was it worth it? Her words settled in the air like dust, impossible to ignore. Ethan tried to brush them off, but they clung. He forced another laugh, though it sounded hollow now. You make it sound so simple, like everyone can just walk away from the world and find peace. I didn't say walk away, Laura said. I said see it. You can't change what you refuse to look at. She stood, walking to the window. The morning light traced the edge of her shoulder, soft against the worn fabric of her scrubs. You're good at seeing opportunity, she continued. Maybe it's time you learn to see consequence, too. Her words stung not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Ethan stared at the floor again, feeling smaller than he'd like to admit. You sound like someone who's learned that lesson firsthand. Laura turned slightly, her gaze distant. Maybe I have. He caught something flicker in her eyes, then not pity, but memory. He wondered, briefly, who she had lost or what part of herself she'd left behind to stand this steady now. But she didn't offer more, and he didn't ask. A quiet moment stretched between them. Outside, sunlight spilled across the wet parking lot, turning puddles into mirrors. Finally, she looked back at him. Mr. Cole, I'm not asking you to stop being who you are. I'm asking you to remember you're human first. He gave a small, tired smile. You say that like it's supposed to be comforting. It's not comfort, she said. It's permission. The clock ticked softly. He let her words sink in. They didn't feel like advice. They felt like truth whispered from experience. When she gathered the chart and moved toward the door, he spoke again. Quieter now. Doctor, she paused. What if work is the only thing that gives life meaning? Laura turned back, studying him for a long moment. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes softened. Then maybe, she said slowly, you've just forgotten what meaning feels like. He frowned. And what does it feel like? She took a step closer, her voice low but steady, like breathing without needing a reason. Ethan didn't reply. He couldn't. She reached for the chart again, hesitated, then looked him straight in the eye. If you died tomorrow, Mr. Cole, she said quietly, who would notice first, your assistant or your family? The question hung in the air, sharp as glass. And when she left the room, the echo of it stayed longer than any heartbeat, louder than any monitor could measure. For the first time in years, Ethan couldn't think of an answer. The rain had finally stopped, but the sky over Denver still hung low and heavy, the color of dull silver. The hospital cafeteria was half empty, the kind of place that smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Laura sat in a corner booth, her untouched sandwich growing stale beside a cup of cold tea. Her pager rested next to it, silent, for now, a rare mercy. Across from her, Maya leaned back with her arms crossed, studying her friend with the quiet concern of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times already. You know you look worse than your patients, right? Laura gave a small, humorless smile. That's comforting. I'm serious, Maya said. You're running on fumes again. You remind me of half the people you keep saving. Laura didn't answer. She just tore a corner off her sandwich, staring at the crumbs like they held an answer she couldn't quite see. I'm fine, she said finally. That's exactly what they say before I have to stitch them back together, Maya replied, her tone soft but unyielding. You can't keep doing this. Laura, you're not a machine. Laura sighed, leaning back against the hard plastic seat. Maybe that's what it takes. Maya shook her head. No, that's what it takes to break. The words lingered. Laura didn't meet her eyes. Somewhere down the hallway, an elevator chimed and the sound of distant footsteps echoed, steady and rhythmic like a heartbeat too calm to be real. She took a slow sip of her tea, grimacing at the taste. You know what the funny part is? I tell people every day to rest, to slow down, to listen to their bodies. And I can't even remember the last time I had a meal sitting down. Maya's expression softened. That's not funny. That's sad. Laura gave a tired laugh. Yeah, maybe that's the difference between knowing and doing. For a moment, they sat in silence. The hospital clock ticked overhead, marking time that neither of them had enough of. Then her pager buzzed a soft vibration that made her flinch. She stood automatically, slipping back into motion. ICU. They need me. Maya reached out, catching her wrist. Laura. Laura stopped. Maya's voice lowered. Take care of the person behind the stethoscope. 2. Laura hesitated, then nodded once before walking away. The echo of her steps swallowed by the corridor. Ethan's day began with a sigh, not of peace, but of resistance. He sat on the edge of the hospital bed, staring at the notebook that the nurse had left for him. Doctor's orders, she'd said cheerfully. Write something that's not an email for once. He'd laughed at the time, but now the blank page stared back, unflinching. His hand hovered over it, pen tapping against the paper. He hadn't journaled since college, since before everything turned into profit margins and shareholder calls. He tried to think of something meaningful to write, but his mind wandered instead. His assistant would be handling meetings today. The board would be texting him soon. The silence pressed on him like weight. He flipped the notebook open anyway and wrote the date at the top of the page. Then, after a pause, just 3 words I don't know. He stared at them for a long time. He wasn't sure what they meant. Maybe everything. Laura moved through her rounds like clockwork calm, efficient, focused. But each step felt heavier than the last. The monitor's beeping had become background music to her exhaustion, a rhythm her body obeyed out of habit, not strength. By noon, she'd skipped breakfast, missed lunch, and ignored 3 texts from Maya. Her head throbbed behind her eyes, and her mask felt tighter than usual. She stopped at the supply room to breathe, just for a moment. The scent of alcohol swabs filled the air. Her reflection caught in the chrome cabinet pale skin, dark circles, hair escaping from a bun she hadn't retied since dawn. For a second, she didn't recognize herself. She looked like one of the patients she always promised to fix. Her phone buzzed, a reminder from her nutrition app. "It's been 8 hours since your last meal." She almost laughed. "I know," she thought. "I'm working on someone else's heart instead." Ethan sat by the window, pen moving again. This time, words flowed uneven but honest. He wrote about noise, about silence, about fear, about how strange it felt to let go of control even for a day. He wrote about his father, about promises made in grief and kept through exhaustion, about how success had become armor and how tired he was of wearing it. When the nurse came in, he closed the notebook quickly, embarrassed. She smiled like she knew anyway. "How's the writing?" He shrugged. "It's uncomfortable." "That's how you know it's working," she said. He looked at her, puzzled. "How do you mean?" "It's like rehab," she said with a wink. "You don't get better until it hurts a little." By the end of her shift, Laura's feet ached. The hospital corridors had blurred into a loop of lights and muted voices. She stopped outside the OR for a moment, pressing her palm to the cold metal door. Inside, a surgery was wrapping up. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor bled through the thin wall, steady, strong. She exhaled slowly. The reflection in the small glass window caught her again, her face lit by the sterile light, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. For a second, she imagined Ethan sitting in his bed upstairs, writing something down, maybe thinking she was the one who had it all figured out. If only he knew. She rested her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes. Her pulse echoed faintly in her ears. In that still moment, her own voice whispered in her head, quiet, almost tender. "You treat hearts for a living, Laura." But when was the last time you listened to yours? The question lingered, deeper than exhaustion, heavier than any chart she carried. Outside, the last light of day slipped through the hospital windows, stretching across the floor like a soft reminder there was life beyond these walls. She stayed there for a long moment, breathing in the silence. Then she straightened, pulling her mask back up. The corridor hummed to life again as she walked away. The echo of her own question following her down the hall, unanswered. The afternoon light in Denver General had that muted warmth that came after rain, soft, forgiving, tired. Laura walked down the corridor, clipboard tucked against her chest, eyes heavy from another 14-hour day. She'd just finished a post-op consult and wanted 5 quiet minutes to breathe, but habit was stronger than exhaustion. Her feet, without asking, carried her toward room 214, Ethan Cole's room. She paused at the doorway. He was sitting up, legs crossed, reading something on a printed report, probably business documents his assistant had smuggled in. He looked less like a patient and more like a man pretending he wasn't one. When he noticed her, his expression shifted, a small grin, somewhere between charm and gratitude. "Dr. Bennett," he said, setting the paper aside. "You do make house calls after all." Laura lifted an eyebrow. "This isn't a house, and you're still on the clock." He chuckled, the sound low, genuine this time. "I've been told I'm a terrible patient. I thought I'd see if the rumor holds." She checked the monitor beside his bed, not rising to the bait. His heart rate was steady. Too steady for a man trying to mask boredom. "You've been resting. Define resting." She gave him a look over the rim of her glasses, not answering emails, not taking calls, not pretending you're on vacation while secretly working. He raised his hands in surrender. Then, no. Her sigh was soft but weary. "You're determined to make my job harder, aren't you?" He smiled, but something in his gaze had softened. "Maybe I just like having a reason to see you walk in that door." Her hand froze over the chart. For a second, she didn't know whether to be amused or annoyed. Flattery doesn't lower blood pressure. "Mr. Cole." "Maybe not," he said, "but it's worth trying." The corner of her mouth twitched, though she hid it behind a professional calm. She turned toward the small counter to jot a note, and that's when it happened. A nurse's cart, left half-turned in the narrow space, caught her hip as she moved. The clipboard slipped from her grasp. Her glasses slid down, clattering softly to the floor. The world blurred for a second, just shapes, colors, the muffled hum of machines. She crouched to pick them up, cheeks warming as her fingers fumbled against the tile. Her composure, usually airtight, had cracked open. "Let me," Ethan said, already bending down. His fingers brushed against hers when he reached for the glasses. It was a fleeting touch, but enough. She froze. He handed them back carefully, his voice quieter than before. "You're different without those." Laura straightened slowly, slipping the glasses into place. The tone in his voice wasn't teasing. It wasn't flirtation, either, just something real. But her body reacted before her mind could interpret it. Her stomach tightened, her throat went dry. The words echoed different without those, and suddenly she wasn't in that hospital room anymore. She was 24 again, standing in a med school lab, hearing the same tone laced with mockery. "You'd be pretty if you didn't hide behind those." The laughter that had followed, the way she'd smiled back like it didn't matter. Her hand clenched around the clipboard. Ethan saw the change the way her shoulders stiffened, her expression closing like a door. "Laura," he began, but she cut him off. "Dr. Bennett," she said sharply. He blinked. "Right, Dr. Bennett." She didn't look at him. "You should rest. Your vitals are stable, but your heart rate spikes under stress. Try not to overexert yourself with conversation." "Hey," he said softly, but she was already halfway to the door. "I didn't mean." Her voice came out too fast, too tight. "It's fine." But it wasn't. The air between them thickened, awkward and unsteady. Ethan frowned, confusion flickering across his face. He hadn't teased her. Not really. He'd meant what he said. She was different. Without the glasses, he'd seen the freckles across her nose, the tired gentleness in her eyes. She looked human in a way he hadn't expected. Real. He wanted to tell her that, but something in her posture warned him off. She gripped the handle of the door, knuckles pale. "You should sleep. Mr. Cole." "Laura," he said again, quietly this time, almost careful. That one word stopped her. For a second, she wanted to turn around, to explain, to tell him it wasn't him she was angry with. It was the memory of a room full of voices that had once laughed at her for not fitting the mold. But pride, or maybe self-preservation, won. "Good night," she said instead. Then she left. The door clicked shut behind her, louder than it should have been. Ethan sat there for a long moment, staring at the closed door. The silence pressed down on him again. He replayed the moment in his head, searching for the misstep. He'd said something simple, something true, but the look on her face, the quick flash of hurt before she hit it, had hit him harder than he expected. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration prickling. "Nice work, Cole," he muttered under his breath. "You finally say something honest." And she walks out. The monitor beeped softly beside him, its rhythm steady but faintly mocking. He leaned back, exhaling, eyes drifting toward the window. Outside, the rain had started again, thin, steady lines against the glass. Somewhere down the hall, he thought he heard her voice, calm and professional again, as if nothing had happened. That bothered him more than the silence. He looked at the small notebook on the side table, the one he'd started writing in days ago. He opened it, found a blank page, and wrote one line. Sometimes the truth comes out wrong. Then, after a pause, another. Sometimes it scares the person who needed to hear it most. He closed the notebook. Downstairs, Laura moved through the late shift like a shadow. Every step she took was precise, deliberate. A way to outrun the pulse still fluttering at her throat. In the locker room, she splashed cold water on her face. The mirror in front of her was fogged, her reflection blurred, and for a moment, she was grateful not to see herself clearly. But even through the haze, she caught a faint glimpse of her eyes. Still sharp, still tired, still that same girl, hiding behind glass. She pressed her palms to the edge of the sink and whispered under her breath, "It's fine." But her voice betrayed her. It wasn't fine. It hadn't been for a long time. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. Ethan's window glowed faintly on the fourth floor, a quiet rectangle of sleeplessness. Laura didn't look up. She just walked out into the night, her footsteps echoing against the rain-soaked concrete, a rhythm out of sync, yet painfully familiar. The next morning, sunlight stretched thin through the blinds of Ethan's hospital room, carving pale stripes across the floor. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face that look, the one right before she turned away, hurt, guarded. He'd replayed his words over and over, trying to hear them as she must have heard them. "You're different without those." It had sounded innocent in his head, but her reaction said otherwise. He rubbed his temples, exhaling through his nose. He wasn't used to feeling misunderstood. Usually, his words landed exactly where he wanted them to, but with her, everything felt off balance. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Caroline, his assistant, stepped in, holding a folder and a small bag of clothes. Her heels clicked softly against the tile, her energy as precise as ever. "Morning," she said. "You look terrible." "Good to see you too," Ethan murmured. She smiled faintly, dropping the folder on the chair. "Don't flatter yourself. You're not dying." "Right. Apparently not today." "Good," she said, "because the office has been chaos without you." She stopped, studying him. "But maybe chaos is exactly what you need." He looked up at her, meaning Caroline leaned against the counter, arms crossed, meaning you finally hit pause. And for the first time, the world didn't end. That should tell you something. He frowned. "I didn't choose to hit pause." She raised an eyebrow. "Didn't you? Or did your body just make the decision for you?" He didn't respond. She sighed, walking closer. "Look, I've worked for you 8 years. You use charm the way most people use seatbelts to feel safe." Ethan blinked. "Excuse me. You heard me? You turn it on when you want control. When things get real, you smile, you joke, you dodge. It's how you keep people out." Her words landed with a quiet weight. He opened his mouth to deny it, but couldn't. Because she was right. He looked down, voice lower now. "I wasn't trying to dodge anything. Not with her." Caroline softened, tilting her head. "Then maybe stop trying to be clever. Try being honest instead." He let out a long breath, watching the light shift across the wall. "I think I messed it up." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe she just heard you through her own ghosts." He looked at her, surprised by the phrasing. "You really think that I think everyone walks around carrying old bruises? You probably hit one without knowing it." Downstairs. Laura moved like someone determined not to think. She'd signed up for extra shifts the moment her schedule cleared trauma rounds. Emergency consults, overnight coverage, anything to keep busy, anything to keep her mind off the echo of his voice. Her friends noticed, of course. Nurses exchanged glances when she passed, whispering softly. But no one said anything until Maya cornered her in the break room. Maya leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You're volunteering for a 3rd consecutive shift. Are you planning to move into the hospital permanently?" Laura didn't look up from her notes. "It's fine. We're short-staffed. You're avoiding something, she sighed. Closing the chart. I'm doing my job. You're hiding behind it, Maya said, like you always do when something gets under your skin. Laura's lips tightened. Drop it. Maya. But Maya didn't. This is about him, isn't it? The CEO with the attitude. Laura froze, the silence giving her away. Maya's tone softened. What happened? Nothing? Then why are you shaking your head like that? Laura pressed her fingers to her temple. He said something. It doesn't matter. Maya watched her carefully. What did he say? Laura hesitated, then laughed once short. Bitter. He said I was different without my glasses. That's all? Maya frowned. That's it. Laura's jaw tensed. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. Laura looked down, voice quiet now. Back in med school, some of the guys thought it was funny to call me the nerdy heart girl. The one who hid behind glasses and books. I spent years proving I was more than that. And hearing him say it, it felt like going backward. Maya's expression softened. Laura. Maybe he didn't mean it that way. It doesn't matter how he meant it. It matters how it felt. And how did it feel? She swallowed hard, like being seen when you weren't ready to be. Maya nodded slowly. Maybe that's not the worst thing, you know? Being seen. Laura looked up, her eyes tired. You don't get it. Every time someone says something like that, it's never about who you are, it's about how you look. And I've worked too hard to be seen for anything else. Maya reached for her hand, but Laura pulled away gently. You're allowed to be both. Laura, the doctor and the woman, they're not enemies. But Laura just stood, grabbing her chart again. Not for me. She left the room before Maya could respond. Ethan spent the rest of the day pacing the length of his room. Discharge papers sat on the nightstand, unsigned. He wasn't ready to leave, though he wouldn't admit it out loud. He thought about what Caroline had said. You use charm as armor. Maybe she was right. Maybe every joke, every half-smile was a shield against something real. He looked at the notebook on the table, the one that had started as therapy, now half filled with fragments of thought. He flipped to a clean page and began to write. Not about business this time. About her. He wrote about the way her voice steadied when everyone else panicked. The way her hands didn't shake when they should have. The quiet strength behind her, calm. He wrote about the look she gave him before she left the room. Not anger, not quite, but disappointment. The kind that made him want to be better. For a long time, he just stared at the page. Then, slowly, he closed the notebook. He didn't know how to fix what had gone wrong, but for the first time in his life, he knew words wouldn't be enough. He whispered into the empty room, almost to himself. I'll show her I meant it, without words. The vow hung there in the still air, soft but certain. Outside, the light was fading, and the city stretched into its evening rhythm, headlights flickering across wet streets. A quiet hum beneath the window. Ethan leaned back, listening to it, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve, and maybe, under it, something gentler hope. The world had softened a little. At least. That's how Ethan felt 2 weeks later, as he sat on the balcony of his penthouse. Coffee warm between his palms. The Denver skyline shimmered under morning light, crisp, steady, alive. He watched the city move without needing to chase it. For once, that felt enough. He'd made changes, small ones, that somehow felt enormous. Mornings no longer began with 3 missed calls and an inbox full of emergencies. Now they started with silence, breathing, a few minutes of stillness before the world began to talk again. Caroline had suggested meditation apps, but he found he didn't need them, just the quiet hum of the city and the sound of his own heart, steady and human. He'd learned to delegate. The company hadn't collapsed without him. His assistant joked that his newfound calm was unnerving. He'd even started eating real meals, no skipped lunches, no midnight coffee refills. His body, once fueled by caffeine and adrenaline, was learning to live on something simpler, but some habits were harder to unlearn. Every now and then, his hand still drifted toward the phone, his mind reaching for the comfort of control. And every time it did, he saw her face the way she'd looked at him the night she walked out. That moment had etched itself somewhere deep. He hadn't seen her since. Dr. Hughes had covered his follow-up appointment. Professional courtesy, he guessed. Or maybe she'd requested it. Either way, the absence had weight. At the hospital, Laura stood at the nurse's station, signing off patient charts. Her hands moved with practiced ease, but her mind kept drifting. She'd heard Ethan's name once or twice in passing progress reports. Follow-up results, everything good. He was recovering well. That should have made her relieved. It did, mostly. She hadn't seen him since that afternoon. No emails, no notes. She told herself that was for the best. Professional boundaries. But sometimes, when she walked past room 214, the faint echo of their last conversation still flickered through her. Different without those. It wasn't the words. It was what they woke in her something old, something she'd thought she'd buried. She hated that it lingered. Dr. Bennett, a nurse, called softly. The board just sent an update. There's a charity gala next month, Denver Art Museum. They're asking for nominees for donor liaisons. Laura nodded absent-mindedly, barely looking up. I'm sure they'll find someone. Caroline sat across from Ethan in his office, flipping through event proposals. Her nails tapped lightly against the folder. The hospital's hosting a gala, she said. They're honoring donors who've supported medical research. I told them you'd be attending. Ethan leaned back, half amused. Did you now? She smirked. You said you wanted to make things right. Here's your chance. He frowned slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Caroline looked up, expression measured. You've been talking about impact lately, legacy, balance, all that good therapy talk. This donation will actually do something. Research funding, equipment, patient care. It's not about a photo op. Ethan's tone softened. I don't care about photo ops. I know, she said, but people will assume you do. That's why you need someone from the hospital you trust to manage the donation. Make sure it's done quietly, meaningfully. He hesitated. Who's their liaison? They haven't assigned one yet. He thought for a long moment, then said quietly, Ask for Dr. Bennett. Caroline raised an eyebrow. Bold move, not bold. He said, Right. She might say no. He smiled faintly. Then I'll just have to give her a reason to say yes. 3 days later, the hospital board met to review the donor liaison request. The name on the form caught Laura's attention like a sudden chord. Requested liaison, Dr. Laura Bennett. Donor, Mr. Ethan Cole. Her pen stilled mid-signature. Dr. Hughes glanced over her shoulder. Ah, that one. Big donation. They're setting up a long-term grant for cardiac research. Laura's voice was quiet. He requested me? Yes. Seems he thinks highly of your professionalism. Hughes smiled lightly. You should be proud. Not many donors are that specific. She didn't answer right away. Something in her chest, not quite anger, not quite fear, tightened, Dr. Hughes asked. She forced a nod. Of course, whatever's best for the hospital. But when she turned away, her pulse betrayed her. That evening, Laura sat on her porch, the last of the sun fading behind the rooftops. The air smelled faintly of pine and rain. She cradled a cup of chamomile tea between her palms, staring at nothing. Maya's text came through at 7:14 p.m. Saw the gala notice. You okay, Laura? Typed back slowly. It's just work. Then deleted it. Rewrote. I'll be fine, Maya replied within seconds. Fine isn't always truth. Laura. Laura smiled sadly. I know. She set the phone down and leaned back, letting the quiet settle. A part of her, the part that still remembered how his eyes softened when he wasn't performing for anyone, wanted to believe the request was genuine. Another part warned her not to read too much into it. Still, something about it felt unfinished, like the universe had left a sentence hanging midair, waiting for her to finish it. Ethan stood in front of the large window of his office, the city lights flickering below. Caroline had confirmed it earlier. That day the hospital agreed. Dr. Bennett would serve as his liaison. He'd thanked her, keeping his tone even, but the truth was his heart had lifted in a way he hadn't expected. He told himself it was about professionalism, about closing a loop, but deep down, he knew it was something quieter, truer the need to face her again, not to explain, not even to apologize, but to show through presence what words had failed to say. He'd changed not completely, not miraculously, but enough to mean it, enough to stand in front of her without the armor. As he turned off the lights, the reflection in the glass caught his eye, a man who looked rested, lighter somehow, not fixed, but healing. He smiled faintly at that thought. Outside, the night stretched wide and clear. Somewhere across the city, Laura Bennett was probably doing what she always did, working late, keeping busy, staying ahead of her own feelings. Soon, that would change. Not because of fate or chance or some romantic twist, but because he'd chosen to face what scared him most, not failure, not illness, but the possibility of being seen, and being seen right. He took one last look at the city lights and whispered under his breath, "See you soon, doctor." The words were quiet, but in the stillness, they felt like a promise. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee that had been sitting too long. Morning light filtered through the blinds, cutting sharp lines across the table. Laura stood at the far end, adjusting the sleeves of her white coat as if the fabric might steady her nerves. She'd walked into dozens of meetings before donors, administrators, impatient board members, but this one felt different. It shouldn't have, yet it did. Ethan Cole sat waiting, posture straight, hands clasped on the table. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit, the kind that fit too well to be new. No tie, just an open collar, like he was trying not to intimidate. It didn't work. His presence filled the room anyway. When she entered, he stood immediately. "Dr. Bennett, Mr. Cole." Her tone was even professional and distant. For a brief moment, silence hung between them, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy sort that makes every breath sound too loud. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "I didn't really have a choice," she said quietly, taking her seat. He gave a small nod, acknowledging it. Fair enough. A folder rested in front of him, thick and carefully organized. He opened it, sliding a document across the table. "I'll get straight to it. This is a research grant, funded through Cole Industries, but structured independently. No branding, no press release, just funding for cardiac research under your supervision." Her eyes flicked to the paper, then back to him. "My supervision." "Yes," he said. "Your methods, your discretion, you decide how the funds are used." She studied him for a long moment. "Why?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because I trust you." The words hit softly, but she caught the weight beneath them. Trust wasn't something people like him gave easily. Still, she kept her tone cool. "You understand how this looks, don't you?" He met her gaze. "I do." "Then you also understand that I can't accept personal gifts from patients, especially ones with influence." "It's not a gift," he said, voice low but firm. "It's a bridge." The word hung there strange, simple, sincere. She frowned slightly. A bridge to what he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "To what I couldn't say right, to what I messed up before." Her pulse jumped, though her face remained calm. "This isn't how you fix things. Mr. Cole, money doesn't erase misunderstandings." "I know," he said. "That's why this isn't about fixing. It's about building." She exhaled slowly, the air leaving her lungs in a quiet sigh. He'd always had a way of saying things that sounded good enough to almost believe. Almost. "Do you really think I'm that easily convinced?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. I think you're the least easily convinced person I've ever met." There was the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth before she caught herself and looked away. He leaned back, tone softening. "I meant what I said that day. About you being different. I wasn't mocking you. Laura, I was noticing." Her hands tightened slightly on the folder. "You don't get to call me that here." "Right," he said quietly. "Dr. Bennett." Another pause. The space between them felt like glass, transparent, fragile, dangerous to touch. She looked down at the grant papers again. Every number was precise, every clause legal and clean. It was exactly the kind of donation the hospital dreamed of. But beneath the neat language, she felt the pull of something messier. "I'll need to review this with the board," she said finally. "Of course," he replied. "And if I agree, this stays professional. No private meetings, no gestures." He nodded, a small smile ghosting across his lips. "No gestures. Understood." For a moment, something eased, not quite comfort, but something close. He cleared his throat, voice quieter now. "There's also the gala next week. Caroline mentioned you'd be attending as the hospital's representative." Laura blinked. "I hadn't decided." "Well," he said, "I hope you do. It's important to me that you were there." She tilted her head slightly. "Important, professionally or personally?" He didn't flinch. "Both?" Her breath caught at the honesty of it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The clock on the wall ticked softly, the sound of seconds stretching thin. Finally, she rose from her chair, the decision sitting somewhere between duty and hesitation. "If the board approves the grant, I'll attend, but as the hospital's liaison, not as your anything else." He stood as well, but his voice carried no challenge, only calm understanding. "That's all I'm asking?" She gathered her notes, tucking them under her arm. "You've learned how to choose your words." He smiled faintly. "You taught me that silence can speak too." For the first time in weeks, she met his eyes fully. There was something there, not the arrogance she remembered, but something quieter, steadier. Growth. Maybe even humility. Still, she wasn't ready to trust it. Not yet. She moved toward the door, her steps slow, deliberate. Her hand brushed the handle before she stopped and turned slightly. "Mr. Cole," she said, her tone soft but firm. "Bridges only matter if both sides want to cross." He held her gaze. "Then I'll be waiting on the other side." Something flickered in her expression, not quite a smile, not quite resistance. Then she nodded once, opened the door, and left. The room felt colder after she was gone. Ethan stood still for a long time, staring at the papers on the table, the faint imprint of her hand still on the folder. He could feel his heartbeat, steady and alive. For the first time in years, he didn't want to control it. He just wanted it to mean something. Outside, the hospital hallway hummed with life nurses moving, monitors beeping, the steady rhythm of a place that never stopped healing. And somewhere in that rhythm, Laura walked away, her footsteps echoing like a metronome, balanced, cautious, but not running anymore. Not away, not yet toward, just moving. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of crossing the bridge. The Denver Art Museum shimmered beneath the soft glow of amber lights, its glass walls reflecting the quiet snowfall outside. Music drifted through the entrance hall, a slow jazz melody, elegant and low. Guests in tailored suits and winter shawls moved like warm shadows across marble floors. The air carried the scent of pine, champagne, and something faintly metallic winter's edge. Ethan stood near the entrance, a glass of sparkling water in his hand, the knot of his tie a little too tight. He'd been to hundreds of events like this, fundraisers, galas, nights dressed in glitter and polite conversation. But tonight wasn't about any of that. Tonight, he was waiting. Caroline nudged him lightly as she passed. Relax. You look like a man about to face a firing squad. He smiled faintly. Feels accurate. Good, she said, means you care. Then she disappeared into the crowd, leaving him to the hum of conversation and the slow ache of anticipation. The minutes stretched, then, through the tall glass doors. She arrived, Laura Bennett. She stepped in from the cold, wrapped in a long black coat, snowflakes melting against the fabric. Beneath it, her dress was simple navy, clean lines, nothing ostentatious. Her hair was swept up loosely, a few strands framing her face. And the glasses, the ones that had become her armor, were gone. She wore contacts instead, and without the reflection of glass. Her eyes looked different, clearer, softer. Ethan forgot to breathe for a moment. When she spotted him across the room, her expression didn't change much. A polite, professional smile. Nothing more. She approached with her usual composure, each step steady, her heels making soft clicks against the marble floor. Mr. Cole? She greeted. Dr. Bennett. His tone matched hers, careful, measured. You clean up well, she said lightly, as though trying to diffuse the tension before it grew too heavy. So do you, he replied. Then, catching himself, added quietly, That's not flirtation, just fact. Her lips curved slightly. Noted. They stood there for a second, caught between formality and familiarity. The music filled the space between their words. He gestured toward the display near the stage, a presentation board showing the new research grant they had finalized earlier that week, her name printed neatly beneath the title, the Bennett Initiative for Cardiac Innovation. Her eyes softened when she saw it, though her expression stayed composed. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to, he said. The work deserves a name. Yours. She hesitated. You realize some people will assume this is personal. He met her gaze. It is just not the way they think. She looked at him, then really looked and saw that he wasn't wearing his usual mask of charm. No rehearsed smile, no performance. Just a man trying to be understood. For a while, they mingled with the crowd, exchanging polite introductions and scripted pleasantries. Ethan kept a respectful distance. He'd learned restraint. It looked good on him. Every now and then, though, his gaze drifted to where she stood by the exhibits, talking with colleagues, her laughter low and brief. She carried herself like someone constantly aware of the line she couldn't cross. When she finally joined him again, the orchestra had shifted to something slower, softer. He extended a hand. Dance with me. She blinked. At a fundraiser. There's a dance floor, he said with a small smile. Seems rude to let it go to waste. For a second. She hesitated, the doctor calculating boundaries, the woman inside them quietly restless. Then, finally, she placed her hand in his. Just one. The music wrapped around them, low and warm. His hand found the small of her backlight. Careful, as though he knew she might pull away. She didn't. Neither spoke for the first few moments. The rhythm carried them, steady as breathing. She was aware of the weight of his hand, the scent of cedar on his jacket, the faint sound of his heart beneath it all, a steady beat that, for once, didn't sound like urgency. He was aware of the way she relaxed slowly in his arms, the slight tremor in her breath as they moved. After a while, she said quietly, You're different. So are you. I'm not sure that's true, she said. He looked down at her. Then maybe you just forgot who you were before you started hiding behind the job. Her eyes flicked up. That's presumptuous. Maybe, he said softly. But I think I've spent enough time pretending to know people. This time, I'd rather just see. She didn't reply, but her silence wasn't sharp this time. It was thoughtful. They turned slowly, the lights glinting off the floor like ripples on water. Around them, conversations blurred into background music. For a few minutes, it felt like the rest of the world had receded, just the two of them, moving through something fragile and uncertain, but undeniably real. When the song neared its end, she pulled back slightly, her hand slipping from his. "You're still learning the rhythm," she said, almost teasing. He smiled. "I have a good teacher." The music faded. She stepped away, but her voice was gentle. "Thank you for the dance and for everything else." He inclined his head. "I told you, doctor, it's not a gift. It's a bridge." She met his eyes, the faintest hint of warmth there now. "Then let's hope it holds." And before he could respond, she turned toward the stage where another speaker began addressing the crowd. The light from the chandeliers caught her profile, calm, resolute, and something softer he hadn't seen before. Ethan stayed where he was, watching her from a distance. The music began again, another song, another rhythm, but he didn't move. He knew better now than to rush a bridge before it's ready to bear weight. Outside, snow continued to fall, slow and steady against the museum's glass walls. Inside, beneath golden light and muted applause, something fragile had shifted between them, not resolution, not yet redemption, but the quiet, careful beginning of trust. And for Ethan Cole, that was enough to keep dancing even after the music stopped. The music inside had softened to a hum, the kind that faded into the edges of conversation. Outside, the night was quieter. Denver wrapped in its winter hush. The museum balcony overlooked the city, a stretch of lights flickering like restless stars. Snow gathered on the railing in a thin white line, melting slowly under the glow of the heaters. Ethan leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets, watching the breath leave his lungs in pale wisps. Behind him, laughter drifted through the glass doors, polished and distant. He needed air. Laura stepped out a moment later. He didn't turn at first, but he knew it was her. There was something in the way she moved, unhurried, grounded, like she carried silence with her instead of filling it. "Too loud in there?" she asked, standing beside him. He gave a faint smile. "To everything." They stood side by side, saying nothing for a while. The city stretched below them, lights blinking through the soft curtain of snow. "You seem quieter tonight," she said finally. "I've been practicing." She glanced at him. "Meditation breathing," he said, "mostly through regret." Her lips curved slightly. "That's one way to learn." He exhaled slowly, eyes still on the skyline. "You ever notice how some mistakes don't end? They just replay. Quieter, but always there." Her voice softened. "Yes." He hesitated, fingers tracing a line in the frost along the railing. "After my father died, I told myself I'd never lose control again. That if I worked hard enough, if I built things strong enough, nothing could break like that ever again." He paused. "But that's not how it works." "Is it?" Laura didn't answer. The silence between them was kind, the kind that lets truth find its own way out. "I was 16, he went on. "He had a heart attack in front of me. One minute he was laughing, the next, gone. And the worst part wasn't losing him. It was realizing I'd been too scared to move. I froze. Could have called sooner, done something, anything. But I didn't." He rubbed the back of his neck. "That moment lives in my chest. Every panic attack I've had since that's where it starts. That second of silence before the siren." Laura looked at him, then not as a doctor, but as someone who understood what it meant to live with invisible wounds. "You were a kid," she said gently. "You don't blame a child for freezing. You blame the world that never taught him how to be still without breaking." He turned toward her, his expression unguarded now. "Do you ever stop blaming yourself sometimes?" she said quietly. "Sometimes I just get better at hiding it." Ethan studied her face, the calm lines, the measured breath, the quiet sadness that lived somewhere behind her eyes. "What happened to you?" he asked softly. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she leaned against the railing beside him, her gloved hands resting over the thin line of snow. "I was married," she said, "for 7 years. His name was Mark. We met in residency, 2 surgeons, both exhausted, both convinced ambition was love." She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. He was brilliant, charismatic. Everyone adored him. I did too, for a long time. Ethan stayed silent, listening, but somewhere along the way, I became invisible. She continued, not in the dramatic sense, just quietly erased. He'd talk about his successes, his cases, his breakthroughs, and I'd listen, because that's what you do when you love someone. You make space. But one day I realized I'd made so much space there was nothing left of me. She looked down, voice steadier now. "He told me once, 'You're so self-sufficient, it's hard to feel needed.' And I thought that was a compliment." Ethan's brow furrowed. "He didn't see you?" "No," she said softly. "He saw the doctor, the steady hands, the clean reports, the person who never faltered. Not the woman who sometimes couldn't sleep, who skipped meals, who cried in her car between surgeries. The air hung still. A siren wailed faintly in the distance, then faded into the night. I stayed longer than I should have," Laura admitted, "because leaving meant admitting I wasn't unbreakable. And I'd built my whole life around that idea." Ethan's voice came low, like a confession echoing hers. "You and I built the same house, different walls, same emptiness." A small laugh escaped her. "That's poetic. Mr. Cole, true things usually are." She turned toward him then, really seeing him the way his jaw clenched when he spoke about pain, the faint tremor in his fingers as he held the cold air. "You look lighter tonight," she said quietly. "I feel it," he admitted. "Maybe it's because I stopped trying to fix what hurt and just started admitting that it did." She nodded slowly. "That's the first step toward healing." "Is that the doctor talking?" he asked with a faint smile. "No," she said. "That's just me." For a moment, they stood there, 2 people who had spent years patching up others while ignoring their own fractures. The snow continued to fall, soft and unbothered. Ethan looked back toward the city, the reflection of the lights flickering in his eyes. "You know what's strange, for all the noise in my life? I don't think anyone's ever really listened." "I did," she said simply. He met her gaze. The warmth in her tone was quiet but undeniable. And in that moment, the space between them felt smaller. Not gone, just softened. He let out a slow breath, the kind that came after holding something too heavy for too long. "Maybe," he said finally. "We both forgot we were human." Laura's eyes lingered on his, and for the first time, she didn't hide the emotion there, the weariness, the recognition, the fragile kind of grace that comes from being seen without having to ask for it. "Maybe," she whispered, "it's time we remembered." The wind picked up, scattering flakes of snow around them. Inside, music swelled again, the murmur of voices, laughter, the clink of glass. Neither moved. The night stretched quietly, full of everything they hadn't said, everything they didn't need to. The city lights shimmered below, and in their reflection, they stood not doctor and patient, not donor and professional, but simply 2 people standing in the cold, remembering how to feel. The morning broke gray and cold, the kind of light that made even good news sound cautious. Snow still clung to the edges of the city, melting into thin rivers along the sidewalks. Laura's phone buzzed just after 7 once, then again and again. She was pouring coffee in her kitchen when she finally looked. Headlines blinked across the screen, sharp and merciless. Coal Industries donation controversy, PR, move, or genuine charity. CEO Ethan Cole ties hospital. Funding to personal image campaign. Dr. Bennett's research fund under scrutiny. Her stomach dropped. The mug in her hand trembled slightly. She scrolled through the articles, each one twisting the story into something ugly. Photos from the gala, her smiles, his gaze, the dance framed like evidence. Words like manipulation, strategic philanthropy, corporate branding. It wasn't just speculation. Someone had leaked documents, selective quotes, timing that made it look deliberate. Her phone buzzed again. Maya, Laura, you've seen it. Yes, Laura said, her voice flat. Maya exhaled through the line. It's everywhere. The board's panicking. PR's drafting a statement. Laura pressed a hand to her forehead. Please tell me this isn't true. I don't think it is. But perception doesn't care about truth right now. Laura ended the call and stood still. The hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. The smell of coffee turned bitter in the air. By the time she arrived at the hospital, whispers were already floating through the hallways. Faces turned, glances lingered. Even the nurses she worked with every day spoke to her a little too carefully, like her presence carried something fragile that might shatter. In the conference room, the hospital administrator, Dr. Hughes, and 2 board members were waiting. Dr. Bennett, Hughes said, his voice tight. We're temporarily pausing the rollout of your research program until the situation clears. My research program, she repeated. It's not even about me. This is about optics. One of the board members cut in. And right now, those optics are complicated. Her jaw tightened. What about Ethan? His office hasn't responded to media requests. No official comment. Laura let out a sharp breath. So, he's not denying it. Hughes glanced down at his notes. He's refusing to make a statement to protect the hospital's reputation. He believes engagement will only fuel the story. That silence, to her, said everything. When she stepped outside, the corridors seemed longer, emptier. The steady rhythm of her footsteps on the tile was the only sound that didn't judge her. She found herself in the break room, staring out the window at the city. Somewhere out there, Ethan Cole was sitting behind his desk, calm, silent, controlled, letting the world believe he'd turned her into a headline. The betrayal felt sharp, precise, almost surgical, almost. How could he say all those things about trust, about bridges, and still let her drown in the noise? By noon, reporters had gathered outside the hospital gates. The front desk was fielding calls. A nurse whispered that someone had seen Ethan leaving the Cole Foundation headquarters, his face unreadable as cameras flashed. When Maya came in later with lunch, Laura barely looked up. He's protecting you, Maya said quietly, by saying nothing. By saying nothing when he could have cleared himself and blamed the hospital. He's taking the hit alone. Laura shook her head. That's noble, Maya, but it doesn't fix the damage. Maya studied her for a moment. You really think he did this? That he used you for PR? Laura hesitated. The rational part of her, the part that measured heartbeats and charted rhythms, told her there had to be an explanation. But another part, the one that had been humiliated before, whispered, You should have known better. She didn't answer. That evening, the news cycle was relentless. Commentators debated ethics, motives, power dynamics. Her name appeared in quotes and captions the quiet doctor caught in the crossfire. She turned off her phone. The hospital lights dimmed as night fell, reflecting against the glass walls of her office. Snow started again, softer this time, falling like the world was trying to cover its own noise. She thought of the balcony, the city lights, his voice when he said, Maybe we both forgot we were human. She wanted to believe that was real, but belief felt dangerous now. At 9, she left her office and walked past the empty corridors. The sound of her heels echoed faintly, a reminder she was still here, still moving, even when everything else felt suspended. As she passed the patient wing, she saw the television in the waiting area muted, subtitles crawling across the bottom of the screen. A photo of Ethan, hands in pockets, walking past reporters. The text read, Cole refuses comment on donation allegations. My focus is the work. The words struck her harder than she expected. Not denial, not defense, just quiet conviction. He was choosing silence over reputation, over his name, over her anger. For a long moment, she stood there watching the silent footage cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, his face calm but not cold. It was a look she recognized now. Restraint. And suddenly, she saw what she'd missed. He wasn't hiding guilt. He was protecting something bigger than himself. The hospital, the staff, the patients, maybe even her. The realization came too late, but it came all the same. She sank onto the nearest chair, the light from the TV flickering across her face. Somewhere deep in her chest, the steady rhythm she trusted faltered just for a beat. Outside, snow kept falling. Somewhere across the city, Ethan sat alone in his office, his phone on silent, the world shouting through glass he refused to break. He could have fought back, could have cleared his name in an instant, but he didn't, because sometimes defending yourself means destroying what you're trying to protect. And maybe, in his own quiet way, this was his confession too. Laura closed her eyes, the hum of the television fading into the rhythm of her heartbeat. Maybe he hadn't betrayed her after all. Maybe he was teaching her what loyalty really sounded like, silence that spoke louder than any defense. The snow kept falling, blanketing the city in white, erasing footprints and mistakes alike. And in that quiet, she finally understood what bridges were built for not to return to where you started, but to cross into something you can't yet name. The rain had started before dawn, soft, steady, almost polite. By mid-morning, Denver was wrapped in gray, the kind that blurred city lines and made everything feel smaller, quieter. Inside the coal industries tower, the boardroom buzzed under fluorescent light, sharp suits and sharper words. Ethan sat at the head of the table, eyes focused but weary. "Mr. Cole, the foundation's reputation is at stake. One executive pressed. You can't keep silent forever." Ethan's fingers traced the edge of a pen. "The noise will fade, the work won't." Someone sighed. "With all due respect, sir, your silence looks like guilt." He looked up then, voice calm but distant. "Sometimes silence is just peace." But even as he said it, something in his chest tightened a familiar, unwelcome pull. He ignored it. He'd been doing that for weeks. The room blurred for half a second. His hand went to his tie, loosening it just enough to breathe. A low murmur filled the space. "Sir, are you—" He tried to answer, but the words came out as air. His vision flickered. The pen slipped from his hand, rolled across the table. The sound small, metallic was the last thing he heard before the world fell away. The paramedics arrived within minutes. By the time Laura got the call, she was already halfway through her morning rounds. She froze when she heard his name. "Ethan Cole," the nurse repeated. "Collapsed during a meeting. En route now. Cardiac episode." The hallway tilted slightly, for a heartbeat. Everything inside her went silent. Then she moved. When the ambulance doors opened at Denver General, she was there, hair tied tight, gloves already on, mask in place. She didn't speak to him, not yet. There wasn't time for words. "BP's dropping." Someone shouted. "Prep the cath lab," Laura ordered. "Now." The gurney wheeled past her, the air thick with urgency. Machines beeped, wheels screeched against the floor. Voices cut through the hallway like quick pulses. In the operating room, she washed her hands, the water colder than she remembered. Her reflection in the steel faucet looked back calm, focused, haunted. The same look she'd worn the first night she met him. The circle had closed. She stepped into the OR, and the noise changed softer, deliberate, rhythmic. Every movement became its own language. "Vital?" she asked. "Unstable," came the reply. She glanced at the monitor, erratic lines. Uneven rhythm. Her pulse tried to match it. "Ethan," she whispered, low enough that only the air could hear. Don't you dare quit now. Scalpels, clamps, monitors, hands moving in practiced choreography. She'd done this 1,000 times, but not like this, not with her heart in the room, not with fear threading through her veins like a second pulse. Push epi, she said. Done. For a moment, nothing. Just the sound of machines and rain tapping faintly against the windows. Then a blip, small, then another. He's responding, the nurse said. Laura didn't look up. Her eyes stayed on the monitor, steady, measured. Minutes stretched like hours. The team moved around her, precise, silent. Every beat, every breath was a negotiation between science and faith. When the rhythm finally steadied, Laura exhaled slow, trembling, the kind of breath that carried a prayer inside it. Stabilize him, she said quietly. No mistakes. Her gloves trembled slightly as she stepped back. The nurse noticed. Doctor, you should... I'm fine. But she wasn't. Her chest ached, not from exhaustion, but from relief so sharp it hurt. She watched as they transferred him to recovery, tubes and monitors framing his still face. His skin was pale, his lashes darker against it. He looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Hours passed before she allowed herself to sit. The OR was quiet now, the storm outside easing into drizzle. Her scrubs clung damp to her shoulders. The clock ticked softly. She closed her eyes for a moment, and, in the silence, her mind went back to his laughter on the balcony, the warmth in his voice when he said, maybe we both forgot we were human. She had thought she'd lost him to pride, to scandal, to silence. She hadn't expected to lose him like this. When she finally entered the recovery room, the lights were dim. Machines hummed a steady lullaby of survival. She stood beside his bed, her fingers resting lightly on the railing. You're supposed to be the one teaching people about balance, she murmured, not collapsing in boardrooms. His eyes fluttered open, faint but focused. For a second, she thought she imagined it. Then he smiled small, weak, but unmistakably his, you told me. His voice was barely a whisper, to stop running. Her breath caught. She leaned closer, her hand finding his. It was warm now, alive. And you finally listened, she said softly. He gave a faint chuckle, the kind that hurt to hear. Took a while. She squeezed his hand, steadying it in hers. You're lucky I'm stubborn too. He tried to reply, but the effort faded into a sigh. His eyes closed again, his breathing slow, even. Laura sat beside him, letting the quiet fill the space between them. Outside, the rain had stopped. Light pushed through the clouds, pale and clean. For the first time in months, she let herself feel tired, not defeated, just human. The monitors beeped in rhythm, steady as a heartbeat that had found its way back. She brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, whispering to the stillness. You're safe now. Don't make me repeat this lesson. In that small, sterile room, with its hum of machines and smell of antiseptic, something softer took root. Not victory, not even relief, just the fragile, beautiful truth of being alive. Ethan stirred once, the corner of his mouth lifting, his words barely audible. You told me to stop running. Laura smiled through the exhaustion, her eyes warm, her voice a whisper against the hum. And you finally did. Outside, the city began to breathe again. The storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean, as if the world, like him, had been given another chance. The spring sunlight slanted through the wide windows of the rehabilitation center, soft and forgiving. Outside, the trees were beginning to bloom again, their branches heavy with the first blush of green. Inside, the world moved slower, steady footsteps in the hallway, the quiet shuffle of nurses pushing carts, the muted rhythm of lives being rebuilt inch by inch. Ethan sat by the window, His legs stretched out in front of him, a blanket draped over his lap. The newspaper sat folded beside him, untouched. He had been reading the same headline for 10 minutes, but couldn't remember a word of it. His mind was elsewhere on the hum of the machines, the scent of antiseptic and lemon polish, the sound of rain he'd once thought was silence. He didn't expect her to come that morning, but when the door opened and her quiet presence filled the space, he knew without looking up. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," Laura said softly, the corners of her mouth lifting into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't far from it either. He looked up, eyes tracing her face, still calm, still composed, though softer somehow, less guarded. "Dr. Bennett," he said, mirroring her formality with a teasing note he couldn't quite suppress. "Or do I call you Laura again?" "That depends," she said, walking closer. "How's your blood pressure today?" He laughed, a low, rough sound that made the nurse passing by glance in surprise. "Better, apparently." She checked the monitor out of habit, though he was already stable. His numbers had been improving each day, the steady line on the screen no longer something fragile but reassuring. She noted it quietly, then sat in the chair beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them felt different now, no longer heavy, just full. "How are you feeling?" she asked finally. "Like I'm not made of steel," he said. "It's strange. For the first time in my life, I'm okay with that." Her gaze softened. "That's progress." He tilted his head. "Is that the medical verdict? It's the human one." He smiled faintly, his eyes drifting to the window. "The city looks different from here. Slower. Like it's breathing again." "You're the one breathing differently," she said. He thought about that for a moment. "You know," he said quietly, "the day before I collapsed, I told myself I'd start running again. Just a mile, maybe 2. I thought it would help me clear my head. Running never helped you clear anything," she said gently. He chuckled. "You're right. I wasn't running toward anything. Just away." The quiet returned, but it wasn't awkward. It was reflective, the kind of pause that carried weight, because both of them knew how much had been said already. Laura folded her hands, looking down at them for a moment. "There's something I should tell you," she said softly. "After the scandal, I thought you'd use me. I thought all of it was another performance." Ethan's brow furrowed. "I know." She looked up. "You knew I could see it in your eyes that night," he said. "You looked at me the way I used to look at myself, waiting for proof that I'd done the wrong thing." Her voice wavered slightly. "I was afraid of that you'd only ever see the doctor," she said quietly. "Not the woman, not the parts that are tired and scared and trying to hold everything together." He didn't respond right away. His hand, still a little unsteady, reached for hers on the armrest. His fingers brushed hers, tentative. Not assuming, just present. "Laura," he said, his voice lower now, steadier than it had been in weeks. "You were the first person to see me without the armor." Her breath caught, the words hitting her with the kind of truth that didn't need to be explained. "I didn't know how to handle that," he continued. "You looked at me and didn't see a headline or a company or a paycheck. You saw me, and I panicked." She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no distance in it, no masks, no titles, just 2 people who had both tried too hard to be invincible and had finally learned to be real. "You know what's funny?" he said with a faint smile. "All my life, I thought strength was about control, but the strongest moments I've had recently were the ones when I let go." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes letting go is the only way to hold on." Outside, a breeze stirred the trees, scattering petals across the lawn. Inside, time seemed to move differently, not slower, but deeper. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. "You ever think about how strange it is? The people who walk into our lives exactly when we've stopped looking for them." She smiled. "All the time." He turned to her, his tone softer. "So what happens now, Dr. Bennett?" She tilted her head, amused. You recover. You learn how to live without chasing deadlines. And I listen to my own advice for once, she said. Maybe take a vacation. Maybe learn how to stop carrying everyone else's heart except my own. He smiled, a quiet warmth flickering behind his tired eyes. If you figure out how to do that, promise you'll teach me, only if you promise not to run away halfway through the lesson. He laughed again, the sound lighter this time. It filled the room like sunlight through a half-open window. For a moment, everything was still. No machines, no walls, no years of distance. Just two lives, slowly learning to move at the same rhythm. Laura stood, adjusting his blanket gently. I'll check on you again tomorrow, she said. He caught her hand before she could pull away. Laura. She looked down at him. Thank you, he said simply, for saving my life. She hesitated. It wasn't just your heart I was trying to fix. He smiled faintly. I know. Her hand lingered in his a moment longer, then slipped free. She walked toward the door, pausing once to glance back. He was watching her, the sunlight glinting off his eyes, the faintest trace of peace on his face. And for the first time since the night they met, neither of them felt like they had to pretend. Outside, the spring air carried the scent of something new, not the urgency of beginnings, but the gentleness of healing. Inside, the rhythm of two hearts steady, now found a way to meet in silence. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Denver General, soft and golden, painting quiet stripes across the floor. The hospital was already awake, footsteps echoing in the hall, the faint beeping of monitors, the rustle of pages turned at the nurse's station. It was the same place, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Laura walked slowly through the corridor, her pace unhurried for once. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, but there was a calmness in it now, or maybe it was her. 6 months had passed since that long night in the operating room, and though she still wore the same white coat, something inside her had shifted. She greeted a patient by name, stopped to adjust a child's blanket in pediatrics, laughed quietly with the nurses about a spilled cup of tea, small things. But that's what her life had become, a collection of small, gentle moments instead of one endless rush. In her office, sunlight warmed the edge of her desk. A single vase stood there, holding fresh white tulips. They had arrived that morning with a handwritten note, the ink slightly smudged where a hand had paused. For the one who taught me how to stop running. She touched one of the petals, soft and cool beneath her fingers. White tulips, forgiveness, new beginnings, the kind of flower that carried meaning without saying it aloud. She smiled, just a little, before setting the card down. Ethan Cole had become something of a quiet legend in the business world again, though in a very different way. No longer the iron-willed CEO chained to endless hours and perfection. Now, people described him as the mentor who taught balance. He spoke at small gatherings, not about profit or ambition, but about health, rest, and the cost of ignoring your own heartbeat. He'd started a foundation for young entrepreneurs, one focused on sustainable success. The name wasn't flashy, it didn't have his logo on it, but every person who met him said the same thing. He listened now, really listened, sometimes late at night. Laura would see his interviews online, his tone softer, his laughter unguarded. Once, when asked what changed him, he paused and said, "A doctor who reminded me that even strong hearts need rest." She had closed her laptop then, not because it hurt, but because it was enough. Some things didn't need to be revisited. They only needed to be remembered kindly. Outside her window, the city shimmered under early light. The same skyline she'd seen 1,000 times before, but now it looked alive. A knock on her door pulled her back. "Come in," she said. It was Maya, holding 2 paper cups. "Still take it black." "Still," Laura said, smiling. Maya handed it over and leaned against the doorway. "Tulips again," Laura nodded. "Every month," Maya grinned. "You know, most women would call that romantic." Laura chuckled softly. Most women didn't meet him in the ER with a heart monitor attached. They laughed together, the sound light and easy. After Maya left, Laura sat for a long while, sipping her coffee, watching the flowers sway slightly in the sunlight. For the first time in years, her hands weren't trembling from exhaustion. Her calendar wasn't overbooked. She even took weekends off, sometimes hikes in Boulder, slow mornings with pancakes and silence. She'd learned something about healing. It wasn't a straight line or a miracle moment. It was a series of tiny choices to rest, to forgive, to stay open even when it was easier to close. And forgiveness, she'd realized, wasn't always for someone else. Sometimes it was for yourself, for the years you didn't know better, for the hearts you couldn't save, for the moments you mistook survival for strength. She stood and walked toward the window. The glass was cool beneath her fingers. Outside, the trees bent slightly in the wind, scattering white petals that looked almost like snow. Her reflection looked back at her, familiar yet different. The woman staring back was softer now, her hair a little looser, her expression lighter. The tiredness had faded from beneath her eyes. And then, slowly, she reached up and took off her glasses. The world blurred for a heartbeat, then cleared sharp and bright and impossibly alive. She didn't put them back on right away. She simply looked out, unguarded, the sunlight catching in her hair, the city stretching wide before her like a promise. A nurse called her name faintly from the hallway, but she didn't turn. She just stood there, breathing, the kind of breath that came not from relief, but from peace. Outside, somewhere in the city, Ethan might have been walking to another talk, another classroom full of young dreamers. Maybe he'd look at the skyline and think of her, too, not with regret, but with gratitude. Because sometimes, the people who walk into your life aren't meant to stay forever. They're meant to shift the way you see yourself. And that, she thought, was its own kind of forever. The clock ticked softly. The white tulips glowed against the sunlight. Laura took one last sip of coffee, set it down, and smiled small, real, and utterly at peace. Then she whispered, almost to herself, maybe healing isn't about fixing what's broken, but seeing it clearly for the first time. The words lingered in the air like a sigh. Outside, the wind caught the petals and carried them away. And for the first time, in a long time, Laura Bennett didn't feel the weight of what had been, only the lightness of what was. The camera might have lingered there on her reflection, on the sunlight, on the tulips swaying gently in their vase before fading to quiet, a gentle end, and a quiet beginning. In the quiet rhythm of Ethan and Laura's story, we're reminded that healing is not about erasing pain, but learning to live truthfully after it. So many of us spend our lives running, chasing success, approval, or simply the next day until something forces us to stop. Yet it's in that stillness, uncomfortable and humbling, that we begin to see what truly matters. The story teaches that strength is not found in control or perfection, but in vulnerability, in admitting we're tired, scared, or human. Forgiveness, too, is not always for others. Sometimes it's the gentle mercy we give ourselves for the years we tried too hard. Life, especially as we grow older, becomes less about fixing what's broken and more about seeing it clearly with kindness, patience, and grace. When we slow down long enough to listen to our hearts, to one another, we find that peace isn't something we chase. It's something that finds us when we finally stop running. Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart or made you pause for a moment of reflection, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need a little light today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of what truly matters.